Really? We're really going down this one? Yes, we are. Well, this doesn't look right, does it? Welcome folks, it's Nick here. In March of this year, 2022, I bought a brand new Honda CB500X with a view to doing a big trip around Europe. The trip was going to be split into two legs, and south first, down the Baltic to Greece, back up through Croatia, etc. And the second leg up to Nordkap and back again. I completed the first leg, and that was about 6,500 miles over 6 weeks. I didn't get to complete the second leg. I didn't in fact start really the second leg because I just left it too late and other priorities got in the way. But I did do a 2,200 mile trip up from where I live in the south of England up to Scotland, North Coast 500, and also a little bit of Wales. So why this video? At about 5,000 miles during my trip in southern Europe, I did a review of the bike whilst riding through the Albula Pass, which was very pleasant indeed. I've now completed about 10,000 miles, and I thought it was time I gave another update. It's midwinter. I'm back in the UK. The weather is quite atrocious. And if you've seen my other videos, you'll know that I'm not really too worried about riding in the rain. This is not very pleasant. But the incentive to do so for this, it just isn't there at the moment. We're just not having great weather. So I thought I'd try a different approach. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. And if you do, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, as it really does help the channel. But with no further ado, let's just jump straight into the review. The question I'm answering is, was this the wrong bike for my trip? So you might think that's a bit unusual and wonder why I'm not asking why this was the right bike for the trip. As you're probably aware, there are dozens and dozens of bikes that could be the right bike for any trip. I haven't ridden those. I've ridden this one. And based on my experience, it's easier to say whether this was the wrong bike for the trip rather than the right bike. I think it makes sense. Please note, this is just my opinion. And it's based on the real-world experience of riding the bike for 10,000 miles across multiple terrains in all sorts of weathers at times of day. So bear that in mind as we go through. Just to set the scene, I'm about 6 foot, 183 centimetres, 12 stone, 168 pounds, 75 kilos. So when I talk about things like comfort and ergonomics, that's based on my frame. And if anything, I've got a slightly longer body than long legs, so bear that in mind too. I should mention that I was camping some of the time, and therefore, as well as the usual clothing, tools, safety, first aid type of kit, there was quite a chunk of camping gear that was loaded onto the bike as well. So looking at the bike, style-wise, I'd never owned an adventure bike before. I must admit, it never really appealed. I've ridden and owned nakeds, sports tourers and sports bikes. Never really been one for the adventure bike. But with this trip in mind, I decided that I would prefer to have something smaller capacity that could handle multiple terrain and weather conditions. Price was a very important factor to me, and this bike when I bought it was just under £6,300, I think, which was the top end of my budget. So I couldn't really go for the larger bikes anyway, but because of the decision that I wanted to go for a smaller engine capacity, less power so that I was more inclined to enjoy the whole journey rather than just blast through it. This bike ticked the right boxes for me. I've got a video about the decision-making process if you want to go through that, but this review is about I've bought the bike, I've ridden it for 10,000 miles. These are my thoughts on it now. Aligned to the budget for the bike is, of course, fuel economy. And overall, I was getting somewhere between 3.2, 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres, which is around the 88 at times miles per gallon, imperial gallon, which is fantastic fuel economy. So I think I could probably get around almost 300 miles out of a tank full, but that would have drained it.
My favourite feature of the bike is its frugality. It's doing about 3.2 litres per 100 kilometres, which I think is about 88 or high 80s miles per gallon, imperial gallon that is, which is, excellent really.
I should say that my speeds overall were quite relaxed. I'm not in a race anymore to get from A to B very quickly, but I did cover motorway miles as well as small suburban roads, country roads, unmade roads. So we have to think about that when we talk about fuel consumption. I've done a few hundred miles, I guess, on motorway, on highways, and I'm pretty sure fuel consumption took a hit, but I didn't particularly measure it. The bike performed really well overall. I had no issues with it on all types of terrain and roads. I guess, if anything, a little bit more power would have been nice when overtaking uphills, just so that I could get past the vehicle that I wanted to get past. But it was never an issue. It just meant planning, as you have to do anyway, and just making sure that you got past safely. So, as I say, the extra power that I'm used to didn't really come into it. So how about handling and suspension? I had no issues whatsoever with either. It performed very well on all the road surfaces that got thrown at it. As I've said, I'm not really a speeder, so if the roads got really bad, I tended to slow down for them. But it didn't bottom out, there were no issues, even with all the gear on the back. Handling the twisties wasn't an issue. Straight line, very stable. Nice curvy bends, very stable. No challenges. It is slightly more flickable, as you'd expect, without the luggage on the back. I didn't weigh it, but it's probably the equivalent of having a small child on the back. I had no problems with it bottoming out anywhere. It was good. It was a smooth ride, comfortable.
Really steep.
Having returned to the UK, I've ridden with a number of other riders on their GS's and sports bikes and nakeds, and at road speeds it's had no problem at all in keeping up. So all in all, very good from the handling perspective. I travelled through varied weather conditions, and the screen did do quite a good job of protecting me. In its standard position it was a little bit low. In its highest position, at speeds in excess of 60 mile an hour, 100 kilometres an hour, there's quite a lot of buffeting, about 2/3 the way up my visor. It's not too bad. It's quite turbulent, I would say. But overall, the protection it gave me, especially at lower speeds, was pretty good. Having said that, let's talk about comfort in general. I rode on my trip about 8-9 hours a day, and apart from the very initial couple of days where I acclimatized to the bike and doing a lot of mileage, which I hadn't done for quite some time, I've been really comfortable. No real issues with vibration. As I say, the speeds weren't huge, so that might be a factor. But for my frame, The handlebars were in the right place for me. The foot pegs were fine. Non-standard foot pegs. I'll put a link in the description as to what they are. But overall, a very comfortable ride. No real issues with the saddle. Some people have complained about that, but I didn't find that at all. Another non-standard item on the bike is that I'd fitted Bridgestone AX41 tyres. These are 50-50 or perhaps a 60-40 cross tyre.
So here she is then, with the new tyres fitted. As I say, these are the Bridgestone Battlax AX41s. Quite aggressively chunky. So the rear tyre is a different size to the standard size. The standard is a 160/60 and this tyre is a 150/70. That's the closest I could get.
They perform very well in the wet and the dry. The reason I went for them as opposed to the OEMs was that I was unsure of what the terrain I'd be riding across would be. As it happened, I didn't do a great many miles of off-road or unmade road, but when I did, I was really glad I had those tyres at times, because some of the roads were just clay-like, or mud, or gravel and sand. I don't know how the standard tyres would have fared on that. I can't compare it because I have the AX41s.
According to that chap, this is the way to go. Let's try it. Let's hope this is okay. I guess really it should be driving on the plank bits.
They did cause a bit of a rumble as they rolled along. I'd never ridden with these type of tyres before, so I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was very aware of them, especially at higher speeds, maybe 80 to 95 kilometers an hour, sort of 50-60 mile an hour. There was a bit of vibration there, which I put down to the tyres, because as I went through it, it disappeared. Having got back to the UK, I've put the standard tyres back on, and that vibration isn't there, so I think it was the tyres after all. As I say though, for the times that I was riding on unmade roads, I was really grateful for them. My next trip, I'm really not sure. I'm planning to go to Norway. There's a lot of gravel roads there, so I don't know whether the standard, which are sort of 90-10 mix, are the right tyres. Maybe you've got thoughts on that. If you have, please put comments below. It does make the speed a little bit optimistic, I must say, on the speedo with the non-standard tyres, the AX41s, compared to the GPS unit I had. That was just about spot on everywhere. When I went back to the OEMs, it's exaggerated about 2 or 3 miles an hour, especially around the 60 mile an hour mark, in favour of the bike, making you think you're going faster than you actually are. But that's fairly standard on most vehicles in the UK, at least anyway. In any event, the tyres perform well in the wet and dry, regardless of which set I had on, so I'm very pleased about that. The brakes performed very well. There was no sign of fade, especially on the downhill bits of the likes of Delvio and Grimsel and Suston passes, so I was grateful for that. And because I wasn't really travelling at any huge speeds the rest of the time, there was no drama with the brakes. Didn't even notice they were there, which I guess is a good sign. One comment I've seen raised quite often about the bike in its standard form is the gearing. And there's been some suggestion that I change the front sprocket. But actually, I'm really used to the way the bike pulls now. It's very low. First gear is very low. But having ridden the various passes that I have, I'm now comfortable and confident with that. So I think I'll stick with the standard gearing. The exhaust note and the horn can both be described, I guess, as discreet. The horn in particular is more a I'm here, please notice me. But I didn't really need it anyway, so it hasn't bothered me. I had no problems at all with the electrics. It's a very basic budget bike. Good quality, I think it's good quality. But the electrics just worked fine. No issues at all. The lights worked fine in the dark as well. The only slightly odd thing, which is common now with most new bikes, is the running lights. So the indicators are illuminated mildly whenever you turn the ignition on.
The dashboard I find very legible. Some people have complained it's not bright enough. It's just a very simple LCD dashboard. I think it's got a couple of modes, but I've landed on a mode which might be the standard one, which I really like, so I've left it as that.
In my first review, mentioned, and the only bad thing I could think of was the really hot exhaust tailpipe. And it was my fault. I put soft panniers on. I didn't check it properly that they weren't resting on the tailpipe. And I burnt a hole on day 3, which caused a lot of drama. So just don't do that. And I found out since that it's quite normal for modern bikes to get very, very hot very quickly on the tailpipes. And I just haven't noticed it on the other bikes. But then I haven't really gone around touching them, so maybe it's always been there. Just me. As it is a budget bike, there are no modes, riding modes. The ABS seemed to function. You can't turn it off. Didn't cause me any issues. But I've heard tell that it does. But in everyday use that I've had for the 10,000 miles I've done, it's been fine. So having said all that, was this the wrong bike for my trips and for me? And the answer is absolutely no. It was not the wrong bike. For me, this is the right bike for the trips I did. And I'm still enjoying riding it now. Having got back to the UK, I have not ridden my other bikes. It's just the CB500X. It's just very simple, very enjoyable. And with the weather that we've had recently, it's just the right bike to ride. So considering the initial purchase price, the fuel economy, the comfort, the ease of maintenance, I'd recommend this bike quite happily. But what I would wholeheartedly suggest and recommend before you make a purchase of any motorcycle is go and test ride it, because it might not be for you. Everyone's different. So yes, indeed, it was not the wrong bike. I would say it was the right bike for me. And that's about it. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please like and subscribe. I hope to do a few more videos around the camping gear that I took and the riding gear and the hardware that I've put on the bike. So watch this space. All that leaves me to do is say bye for now.